bunch of satellites, but there's one from Japan that takes high-resolution photos of the Earth every 10 minutes, the full Earth from 22,000 miles away.
Yeah, that's the Japanese Himawari 8
Yes,
satellite.
yeah.
But there's also like there's a US satellite that was just launched last year, the GOES 16 satellite, which is basically the same resolution.
Pull this sucker right up to your face.
All right, sorry.
No
And the
worries.
Russians have a satellite. Everyone's got their own satellite because these are basically weather satellites.
Yeah.
So they put them like over the equator so they can see their own country. So Russia has one. You can mostly see India. China has one. It's not as good as the other ones, but the Russian one is like it's the same resolution, 121 megapixels. That's the size of the image they do. It's like 11,000 pixels by 11,000 pixels view of the Earth, and you can zoom in and you can see cities, you can see contrails, and you can actually use these images from the satellites to actually match up with the views of clouds and contrails from the ground. So you can actually check to see if these images are actually correct, at least for where you are.
Right.
And then you could like phone a friend somewhere else and ask them, like, do you have like this type of cloud overhead? So you can actually verify whether these images are actually real or not.
Well, I brought it up to my friend Eddie, and he said it's all fake. He said all the photos are fake. They look fake. I'm like, but how would you know what a real photo of Earth from 22,000 miles looked like? Wouldn't it look exactly like Earth?
Yeah,
Like,
I think when you get to that stage of deep belief, you kind of have to believe that they're fake. There's no
Right.
way, and it's a real challenge. Like, how do you actually break through that for somebody? How can you actually convince them that something isn't fake if they just automatically assume it's fake? And I think has the person actually looked in detail at these images?
most people know.
And have they looked at the fact that you get one every 10 minutes or one every 15 minutes, and do every single image is this 121 megapixel image, and it all matches up exactly with what the weather is around the world, and it matches up with all the other satellite images, one from the Russians, one from the Chinese, one from the Japanese. They all match up, and I really don't think that the people who say it's fake have really actually looked.
Well, you're
at what's
absolutely
actually
right.
out there.
They definitely haven't, nor do they have any desire to. It's a belief issue, and it's almost like a religious issue. It's really fascinating. It's completely infected the world of professional pool players.
Really? Professional pool players?
Yeah, professional pool players. There's a guy named C.J. Wiley. He's a top pool player who's 100% convinced the Earth is flat.
Wow.
There's another guy named Max Everly. He's a buddy of mine. Out of his mind. Thinks the world's flat.
I wonder if that's related to their obsession with the table being flat.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, they have to make sure the table's level, but then they've got these little round balls on the table as well. So
That's
it's,
confusing, right?
Yeah, you've got a little solar system going on with your pool balls.
What's confusing is they're smart guys. Like, if you talk to them, you'd be like, this is a reasonable, intelligent guy.
Are they really believing that it's flat?
100%. Yeah, they're not shit posting.
Unusual. That's unusual.
People, they go down a YouTube rabbit hole, and that's part of the problem, is once you believe something, it's very difficult to unbelieve it.
It is, and there's so much out there that if you tell people to do some research, what they end up doing is just looking at more YouTube videos that confirm what they believe. They prefer the ones that confirm it.
Of course. But it's just amazing to me that people would decide that all of these photos were fake so that they don't believe the world is round, but yet they don't have a single photo of this fucking flat Earth. Not one. Not one photo. Not only that, every planet you see is round. You could follow them. You could look at them with if you have a reasonable telescope. You could see the difference as they change and spin. I mean, you can tell that they're round. There's
a lot of flat earthers have the same camera that I've got, which is a Nikon P900.
Flat earthers have an excellent camera.
They have. I brought one with me.
They have, like, Nikon has a deal with the Flat Earth Society?
It's this camera. It's just like, it's not like a SLR or anything. It's just like a $600 camera. But it's got this really, really long zoom lens on it. Like, it's like a 2,000 millimeter zoom lens. So you can see, you can zoom in on the moon, you can zoom in on stars and planets.
Right.
And you can use this camera, I've used it a few times, to actually take pictures of Jupiter and of Venus and Mars. And you can actually just make out the roundness of the planet and the actual shadow of the sun. Like, you'll see Venus as being like the moon, being like an arc, and you'll see Jupiter and you see the bands of Jupiter, and you can do that with this camera. And this is a camera that a lot of them have because they're obsessed with zooming in on things that are on the horizon, like ships going beyond the horizon. But if they just take the same camera that they have and point it upwards, they would actually see things in the see the solar system basically that really can't be explained any other way. Like one great thing is the moons of Jupiter. Like if you look at Jupiter real closely, even with some binoculars, you can see it's got these 4 little moons that are orbiting it. Then it looks like just 4 little lights in a line with Jupiter, and they actually move around in a regular pattern. And they move around. They've got orbits of like some of them are, I think, like 80 hours or something. So they move around really fast. Like every day, it's a completely different pattern of these little dots around Jupiter. And you can actually see that with this camera. I've taken photos of it, posted them on the website, or even with binoculars. And if you actually watch it from day to day, you will see the moons of Jupiter move in exactly the same way that science predicts that they should move. We're using Kepler's laws of planetary motion and Newton's law of gravitation. They move exactly as if they are a little simulation of a planetary system. So either there's some kind of weird hologram up in that little corner of the sky which moves around, or there is actually a planet there with little moons orbiting it.
Probably hologram. When did you first become aware of this? Like you've run Metabunk for a long time, and for those who don't know, Mick and I met on the sci-fi show that I did, Joe Rogan Questions Everything, where we discussed chemtrails or contrails and what causes a jet engine to make what looks like artificial clouds by passing through condensation. The heat of the engine produces these contrails, and people are absolutely convinced that they're spraying. The government is spraying something in the sky, and you caught it. You had a really good explanation for it. You said they're basically like the training wheels for conspiracy theories, because
it's something you can see.
Yeah.
I think is kind of more enticing.
Yes.
And I think the same thing applies to the flat Earth. Now, you asked me when I got into the flat Earth thing. I became aware of it a few years ago.
What's that sound? Yeah. So the government is trying. Oh, is that your camera? Yeah.
Yeah.
Freaked me out, man. That was the government, man.
Spying on you. Yeah, so, when I first heard about the flat Earth theory, obviously I've heard it before. My father, going back, when I was young, he told me that he was a member of the Flat Earth Society.
Your father told you that?
Yeah.
Was he joking around?
Kind of, but what he was doing it in a kind of satirical way, ironically. He was doing it because he was saying people are too sure of themselves, and so I'm going to join the Flat Earth Society. He didn't believe the Earth was round.
So it's been around for quite a while, the Flat Earth Society.
The Flat Earth theory has been around, obviously thousands of years ago people thought the Earth was round, and then slightly fewer thousand years ago people figured out that it wasn't. It was figured out by the ancient Greeks 3,000 years ago that it wasn't. And by the
that it wasn't round?
That it wasn't flat, sorry.
Oh, you fucked it up. You gave up the goose. You said thousands of years ago that people thought the Earth was round, and they realized it wasn't.
Yeah.
You just right now you gave them fuel.
That's a quote that's going to go on YouTube.
Fucked up.
Like my "I am a shill" quote.
Yep.
From the last one. Which,
yep.
Strike that one.
A slight misquote.
Yeah. So yeah, what happened was science basically figured out the shape of the universe, and in the 1800s there was gentlemen scientists doing all kinds of cool things with stars, like measuring the orbits and checking out how far away things were and discovering that there were galaxies and things like that. There's all this science going on, but then there was this kind of this guy comes along called Samuel Rowbotham, who published under the name of Parallax in about 1860, and he started publishing what is basically the same as Eric Dubay's book that has been published now. Pretty much every single thing that is in Eric Dubay's current book you will find in Samuel Rowbotham's book from 1860. And in fact, if you read Dubay's book, which I don't recommend, you will see that about 80% of the text of Eric Dubay's book is actually quotes from these books from the 1800s. It's not actually this new stuff that he's discovered. It's all stuff like, if somebody walks away from you, you will see their feet disappear first. And then he has a 2-page quote of Samuel Rowbotham saying the exact same thing from the 1860s. So it's basically recycling this theory that started in the 1860s and then just adding a few little sprinkles to it, saying that astronauts must be fake and the space station is fake.
They think that satellites are fake as well.
Yeah.
But Dubay, he's hilarious. He thinks that dinosaurs are fake, nuclear bombs are fake. I mean, there's the idea that one person would be this mastermind that discovers all these monumental frauds.
Yeah, and well, I don't think he's claiming to have discovered these things. There's lots of people who think that nukes are fake, and that dinosaurs being fake is an obvious thing for creationists and people of that ilk. But he's basically recycling theories in a way that is popular to the reader and figuring out how to get them across to people. So he does these YouTube videos that are very engaging. And they sound good. Then they sound, if you don't know what's what, they sound like they make sense.
That's the problem.
And some of them are quite technical. Like, at least they use a lot of technical terms.
Right.
But they delve into things like there's a variety of experiments. The Michelson-Morley experiment that Eddie mentioned is one of them that keeps cropping up, and then there's
which has never been reproduced. That's the experiment that supposedly...
No, it actually has been reproduced because it's
well, the wrong way, not the way that they wanted to.
The Michelson-Morley experiment was an experiment to detect the luminiferous ether, which is the supposed medium through which light travels. Now, back in the 1800s, we didn't know that light was made up out of photons because light was waves. So we thought that there was this stuff that permeated all of space called the luminiferous ether. Luminiferous ether. It's a little hard to pronounce. And that this is what light traveled through as waves going through. And they didn't know exactly how it worked, but they figured there must be this stuff that permeates all of space. And then they figured that since the Earth was moving, and these scientists actually knew at the time that the Earth was moving, so they were using this as a basis for their experiment, they thought that if the Earth is moving, then they will be able to detect the ether by doing this experiment. So what they did, they set up this experiment where they shot light one direction, then they shot it in the other direction, then when it came back together, it combined. And if they were moving through the ether, or if the ether was moving through them, then the light that went one way would interfere with the light that went the other way. So that was the whole experiment, was just this thing. They shot these two light beams in two directions, and they figured, if we turn the table this way, it will change because we're now going through the ether in a different direction. But what happened was nothing was detected, which was kind of the start of people realizing, oh, there is no luminiferous ether permeating the universe.
Right, but they used that to say that it's because the Earth isn't moving. That was what the flat Earth people tried to use, right?
Yeah, they did. But Michelson and Morley knew the Earth was moving.
Right.
They wanted to figure out whether the ether was moving with the Earth, or whether the Earth was moving through the ether.
Right.
So they were trying to detect the ether. So people who thought that the Earth was the center of the universe, not really so much flat earthers, people who were geocentrists, people who thought that the sun went around the Earth and all the stars went around the Earth.
There's still people like that, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
There's a recent resurgence. I think it was Gavin McGinnis sent me something where some guy thinks that the Earth is the center of the universe. Essentially, he was saying that it sort of confirms everything in Genesis. I was like, what?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you need to shoehorn the whole universe into, the descriptions in Genesis, then you're probably going to have to take a few shortcuts. But yeah, there's these experiments like the Michelson-Morley experiment, but people bring them up, and they say that what they detected was no motion.
Right.
But what it actually detected was no luminiferous ether.
Right.
And because they detected no luminiferous ether, they eventually led to theories about what light actually is, which is wave-particle duality. Light is photons, which act both as a wave and as a particle, and eventually to the theory of relativity.
Well, you started Metabunk when? When did you?
I think it was about 5 years ago, but I've been doing the chemtrail stuff with Contrail Science for over 10 years now. I was just looking at one of my old posts when on the satellite images. I was quite surprised at how long I've been doing it. And Metabunk been going about 5 years, and the flat Earth stuff came up maybe 2 years ago. I started to see things about flat Earth, and a bit over a year ago, I wrote a post on what should we do about debunking the flat Earth, and basically said all these people are basically either trolling or they're crazy. So there's no point addressing either of them. And I think most of them are just trolling, because no one could seriously believe this. You'd have to be
I don't think you're right.
I know. I've come to realize that I'm not. I was wrong. And that post now, it's gone down the line, but it's I've almost done a 180 from that.
It's stunning. It really is stunning.
Yeah.
And it's stunning how many people, like, this is why Jamie made these, youngjamie.com. You can go and get these flat earth shill shirts that somehow or another we're being paid to say that the earth is round. Like, the idea that anybody would actually believe it. I've had so many people tweet at me, I know where your checks are coming from, bro. You're a fucking sellout. I'm a sellout. Like, why would I give... You don't think that if I really thought the earth was flat, like if someone thought the earth was flat, what a revelation that would be. What an amazing discovery. Every scientist would be clamoring to expose this. Every single scientist. The idea that all these scientists who make their name off discoveries, by the way, especially a monumental and provable discovery like the world being flat, like somehow or another they would hide that. And then the big question is, why would the government say the world is flat? I mean, why would they, in any way, why would they rather hide the fact the world is flat? Like, what motivation would anybody have to show that the world was round? It would be pretty fascinating if we lived on this flat disk and everybody else throughout the universe was on a planet. We'd be like, whoa, what's going on? And there's a weird thing that's going on with some of these flat Earth people where they're linking this to a sign that we are in some way special, that we are the chosen ones, and that we, in some... It keeps going back to Genesis and that, that we are the children of God and that creation is true and that evolution is a lie. And it gets to some weird anti-Jew stuff with a lot of these guys.
Yeah. Well, a lot of conspiracy theories basically boil down to some kind of suspicion of other people and quite often suspicion of Jewish people.
Why Jewish people? Why? It's always the Jews, man.
It's just...
People can't catch a break.
I don't know exactly why. I think perhaps, perhaps because of the whole, the Jews killed Jesus, so Christians don't like the Jews, or some Christians don't like the Jews.
Yeah.
So they've just been viewed as being an other. And they're often, the Jewish, the broader Jewish population is often like a minority within cities. And so it's got an easy person to pick on when things go wrong. But I'm sure there's loads of books written on why Jews are the subject of conspiracy theories.
But doesn't Dubé have a recent video about Jews and about Hitler? They all go down that road.
Yeah.
What can be done, if anything, other than your website? What can be done, if anything, to like my concern is these young kids that are on the fence. My thoughts are, look, I'm not going to reach out. There's some 45-year-old crazy person who's making YouTube videos 3 times a day about the world being flat and ranting and raving and challenging everyone to debates that he's never going to engage in. Mm-hmm. Those guys don't mean anything to me. You can't do anything about them. But there's some 16-year-old kids out there that maybe are in high school and maybe don't have a real formal education in science or astrophysics, and they're getting confused, and they maybe smoke a little too much pot. That's you, motherfucker, whoever's listening to this. That's you. And you start... I've been tricked before. And I wrote this big Instagram post recently about rods, about those Roswell rods.
I read it.
God, they got me. I was convinced. But it was just, I never looked into it. I just watched a documentary, and this guy had the footage. I was like, wow, these things are flying around and we can't see them. That's crazy. Yeah. And then a show called, if you never saw the Instagram post that I made, there was a guy that made this video, a documentary. I think he made more than one. And it showed that there was these things that looked like tubes that had jellyfish-like wings that were flying through the air, supposedly at speeds undetectable to the human eye. Like, they were moving so fast we couldn't see them. And so I was convinced, man. I was really convinced. And then there was a show called Monster Quest, and what they did is they set up 2 cameras. One camera, which was a very fast, high-speed camera, and the other one, which is a standard video camera. And the standard video camera caught all these rods flying around. And then the exact same images right next to each other with this high-definition, high-speed camera showed actual bugs. So what those rods were was just a video artifact of these bugs that were moving so close to the screen and so fast that the camera couldn't register it correctly. And so it created this elongating effect and made it look like there were these jellyfish.
Yeah, well, I think that type of thing, that type of video is the type of thing that needs to be done to counteract this type of
But I don't think it
belief.
would work, though, because if people aren't looking at the Himawari 8, if they see those images, I put those images up. And, dude, if you look at my Instagram post, it's filled with people angry at me.
Because they think it's fake.
They think it's fake, and they think I'm a shill because I put that up.
Yeah.
You
well,
know?
if you can't get people to look at things, that's a challenge in itself. How do you get people to look at things? But I think like if you start slowly, I engage with a lot of like conspiracy theorist online. And I know when I'm doing it, I'm not actually going to reach the vast majority of the people I'm talking directly to. But I know there's lots of other people reading what I'm saying who will. And, just because people are complaining about your posts of the Himawari 8 images doesn't mean that there aren't people who actually went and looked it up.
Oh, I'm sure, because I think it got like 50,000 likes or something like that. So I'm sure, even besides people that didn't like it, many people that were like, "Oh, really?" Like, because that was one of the big things that the flat Earth people kept saying, that there's no photos of the Earth that aren't a composite from space. Like, it's just not true.
And like this Rod's video that you saw with the two cameras, if that hadn't existed, you might have taken a bit longer.
Yes.
You might still believe it now. You might be telling your friends about it. Have you seen these crazy rods that are everywhere?
The guy who made that video showed up at a Q&A that I did once for the UFC. I do these Q&As where, people yell out questions like, what do you think about this guy fighting that guy, that kind of thing. And he waited in line to get to the front of the line to tell me that I was wrong and that the rods are real. Like, dude, come on, you're still buying it? He's still selling it. They call them Roswell rods, which is hilarious. They're implying that somehow or another they're alien.
Yeah, probably some guy was at Roswell taking pictures trying to get UFOs, and some bugs flew by.
It wasn't even Roswell. That's what's funny. They call them Roswell rods. The best footage is from Mexico. The best footage was from a bunch of cave jumpers. They have that one really enormous cave, but it's a hole, essentially, a gigantic pit, and people skydive into it. Right. You ever seen that?
Yeah, I've seen things like that. But,
it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. But they set up a camera to watch them jump off the edge and parachute down, and you see the rods flying by. That was like the best footage was from Mexico, from this one place. So it had nothing to do with Roswell. They just called them Roswell rods because they're dorks.
They probably had... they were probably looking down the darkness of the pit below, and then they had a shaft of sunlight in front of that. So the bugs were flying through the sunlight with a dark background, which is something you don't normally see. So it would have been like an unusually good environment for rods to show up in.
Exactly. And it's and that guy, waiting in line to get to the front of the line to ask me a question and tell me that he has the evidence and I need to see it. It's that kind of thinking. It's once someone commits to an idea, it's very difficult to shake them off of it, and they just look for confirmation bias. They just look for someone else to agree with them. They find communities. They find these flat Earth communities, which is hilarious. One of the best fucking unintentional hilarious things I read online. This dude wrote, "The Flat Earth Society has members all around the globe."
Yeah.
Whoops.
Did he even realize what he was saying?
Of course not.
Or is that just him
fucking around?
Trolling? Yeah.
I hope it's him trolling.
Yeah. The community thing, I think, is like a key thing.
Yes.
I recently did a debunk of a UFO that the Chilean Navy supposedly saw.
What was that? I'm not aware of that one.
It was like this this thing. There was a Chilean Navy helicopter had this infrared camera. And they saw this two black dots off in the distance that looked like a weird thing, like a figure eight type thing flying away. And then it started like spraying out this stuff, and they couldn't figure what it was. And they chased after it, but it was too fast, and it got away from them. And the Chilean government has an official UFO investigation team. And they set them on it, and they spent 2 years figuring out what it was, and they couldn't figure out what it was, and so they said it's a confirmed unidentified object. And then they published their findings, and then I and some other people on Metabunk looked at it, and we figured out it was actually just a plane flying away from the helicopter, leaving some contrails behind, and we actually figured out exactly which plane it was. And so this got a bit of play online, and I was on like Huffington Post and things like that. And some UFO enthusiasts started talking to me, and I joined their groups, and I joined a few other groups, and then I found myself in this kind of weird corner of the internet where everybody believes in UFOs unquestioningly, and they're always putting up these photographs of things, and people are like, "Oh, great capture, dude." And it's just something like a street light or something. But they think they have this confirmation bias, this group confirmation bias, where they can't disagree with someone, and they know they're in a safe space, so they can put out whatever theory that they like, and they know that people will be like, they're just very supportive of them.
Yeah.
Like one that happened a couple of days ago, some woman put up a picture of a strange light that she said was in the sky. And so I downloaded the picture and I boosted the brightness, and I saw it was actually a reflection of something in a security light on a porch. And you could see it was like there was trees behind it, and it was a security light, and there's this reflection. So I posted that, and then I started getting called like a shill for pointing this out.
Yeah.
There's a couple of people who like said, "Oh yeah, it's just this light," but other people were like, "What the heck? Why don't you believe me? Why are you like invalidating like my claims?"
Right.
And so they want to have these kind of little walled gardens where everybody believes the same thing.
That's a good way to put it. The walled gardens. It really is a good way to put it, because that is what those communities seemed like, and that's one of the things that I found when I did that television show. I still harbored a few conspiracy theories before I did that show, but doing that show for several months and constantly interviewing people who believed in outlandish things, I found the same thing over and over and over again. Illogical people with very little evidence, believing things in almost a religious way. And I found it with Bigfoot, and I found it with UFOs, and I found it with chemtrails, and I found it with, it was just one after the other in varying stages of ridiculousness. I feel like contrails and chemtrails were the most nutty people. The UFO people seem to be the most reasonable, because it's the most reasonable theory out of all of them. The idea that we have spaceships, why doesn't someone else have spaceships? There's hundreds of billions of galaxies in the known universe, hundreds of billions of planets in each galaxy. The odds of there being some sort of a life form out there is pretty high. But there's nothing. That's the craziest thing. Like, the more I talked to these people, the more I went over all their evidence, air quotes evidence, the more I ask them why they believe things. There is nothing. There's not a goddamn thing that you can put on a scale. There's not a thing that you can weigh. There's not a thing that you can measure. There's not a thing that you can look at a photo and go, wow, that's compelling. There's not one. It's just an idea. And that idea is that there's something in the sky that flies around that we, either might catch if you're there, the right place, the right time, or not. And